Paris, 1348. One of Europe's largest cities, home to over 100,000 people. A city accustomed to famine, war, and filth, but completely unprepared for what was to come. Here, the streets are narrow, the sewers are open, livestock roam right next to the houses, and the population density is so high that sometimes several families live in a single room. And it is into this environment that a disease enters, one about which no one knows anything. At first, it looks like a few strange deaths, but within a few weeks, a new profession emerges in Paris. People who simply haul bodies through the streets and dump them into communal pits. The chronicles of that time contain a record. At one point, so many people were dying every day that the church bells simply stopped ringing. They couldn't keep up with stopping them. People quickly realize one simple thing. If someone nearby has fallen ill, you're likely next. Today, using archives, eyewitness accounts, and AI-based reconstructions, we will recreate how the Black Death entered Paris, how the city lost control of the situation, and how one of Europe's largest cities of the time turned into a graveyard. It didn't start in Paris or even in France, but much further away, in places where people don't generally associate their problems with European cities. Like taxes, bureaucracy, or lids nailed to jugs that make it hard to drink wine. In the steppes of Central Asia, the disease had existed among rodents for years and rarely spread beyond local areas. But at some point, it began to travel with people. Through crowded trade routes, rodents carrying some kind of shit gained access to a system capable of carrying them thousands of kilometers. In the 14th century, trade was the world's primary infrastructure. Caravans traveled from China across the steppes, across the Black Sea and onto Europe. And along with fabrics, spices, grain and furs came something that no one recorded on the shipping manifests. Rats, fleas and bacteria that, it seems, hated the peaceful way of life in Europe. In 1346, there is an episode that is often mentioned because it is well documented in the sources, the siege of the Genoese colony of Kaffa in Crimea. A mass outbreak of disease begins among the besiegers, and the bodies of the dead are simply thrown over the city walls. Infection begins inside as well. The infection enters an environment with direct contact with trade routes, and from there, it ceases to be a local problem. Genoese ships leave the port. Some of the crew are already sick, though they do not yet know it. However, within a few days at sea, half the crew will die. Records from that time mention ships where, upon arrival at port, only a few people remained alive. But these ships are accepted anyway, because they bring goods, money, and a connection to the outside world. To refuse them would mean halting the economy, and at that moment, that seems like a far greater problem than an unknown disease. One such ship reaches the French coast. There are several dozen people on board. A few days before its arrival, one sailor on this ship falls ill. He feels a high fever and severe pain throughout his body. At sea, this doesn't seem unusual, but the next day he dies, and almost immediately a second case appears. In the confined space of the ship, it spreads very quickly. People are literally living on top of one another, working side by side, sleeping side by side. Some sources describe how bodies are simply thrown overboard to make room and avoid staying near the dead. When the people go ashore, some of them are already sick but can still walk and talk. Of course, no one checks their condition. In the 14th century, there simply weren't the tools to do so. Unfortunately, sailors didn't look like pretty girls, so they weren't burned alive, a measure that might have prevented the deadly plague, which would soon claim tens of millions of European lives. People disperse throughout the cities and markets. Some go to work, some to trade, and some to brothels, and along with them, what they brought begins to spread. The first cases in Paris are not seen as a sign of disaster, but very quickly, a detail begins to emerge that is hard to ignore. People are dying too quickly. Records mention that a person might have been working just yesterday, is already lying in bed with a fever today, and is carried out of the house tomorrow. If the disease takes a person's life in a matter of days, there is no time for either treatment or explanation. Doctors try to use standard methods, bloodletting, herbs, compresses, but these yield no results. Priests still visit the sick, but very quickly there are more of them than there are people who can hear them out. The University of Paris tries to provide an answer. In 1348, an official document is published explaining the cause as corrupted air, resulting from the alignment of the planets. This seems convincing for a time when people threw their waste right out the windows, but in any case, it offers no instructions on how to stop what is already happening. In one neighborhood, several houses are sealed off. In another, even more. In another, even more. And in yet another, even. People begin to avoid these places even though no one has officially declared them dangerous. A few days later, people do enter these buildings. Not relatives or neighbors. People who are being hired for money to do the work that no one else wants to have anything to do with. They go inside, carry out the bodies, and immediately transport them out of the city or to large cemeteries. In some cases, not even all of them, because there isn't enough time. The cemetery of the Holy Innocents in the center of Paris was already overcrowded even before the plague. For years, people had been buried there in layers because there was no more room. But now they are digging huge pits here, where bodies are simply piled up by the dozens, sometimes not even laid out, but literally thrown on top of each other. Not only is the number of people in the city changing, but so is their behavior. Families who are still trying to care for the sick disappear very quickly along with them, and the neighbors see this. After that, help gradually disappears as a phenomenon. Most people who were unlucky enough to fall ill were simply left alone. Jean de Venay describes the situation without trying to sugarcoat it. People avoid one another because everyone looks like a potential threat. In some cases, parents abandon their children and children abandon their parents. It doesn't look like a mass decision, but there are enough such stories to change the behavior of the entire city. Priests initially try to hold on. They visit the sick, perform rituals, and hear confessions before death. But their numbers dwindle very quickly as some of them die. Doctors disappear even faster. Those who can simply flee and leave the city. At the same time, the city's economy begins to collapse. Markets function poorly because some vendors simply don't show up. Workshops are closing. Work that was being done every day just yesterday has now stopped because there are no people left to do it. And this creates yet another problem, namely, those who are still healthy begin to lose their means of livelihood. Mass unemployment begins in the city, bringing with it hunger, and with that, looting. This group of survivors has banded together, armed themselves, and is terrorizing the city's poor neighborhoods. The wealthy residents react differently. They simply leave. Often without warning, they abandon their homes, businesses, and servants. They head to their country estates so as not to lose the pleasant vibe of their wealthy lives, while Paris loses the people who manage the city's vital processes. Contemporary sources mention figures in the hundreds of deaths per day in Paris alone, and these are only the ones that were recorded. The actual number was likely much higher. Much higher. Much higher. For many months, everything hangs in the balance and doesn't completely fall apart only because there are still people who continue to do at least something. Some transport bodies, some bake bread, some open a shop selling delicious croissants with strawberry jam, with that crispy caramelized crust. And just as imperceptibly as it all began, it starts to subside. Not because of a decision, not because of a cure, and not because someone found the cause. There are simply fewer new cases. Gradually, people realize that the number of deaths has decreased, while there are more people on the streets. Of course, the priests immediately attribute the cause to divine intervention. The authorities claim they've figured everything out. The Knights Templar say it's thanks to them. And the assassins are getting in their way. In reality, there are simply no more people through whom the disease could spread so quickly. By the end of 1348, Paris is already a different place. According to various estimates, the city loses between a third and a half of its population. This means more than just fewer people on the streets. It means empty houses, abandoned workshops, changes in labor costs, and a complete overhaul of how the economy functions. And importantly, no one draws the conclusions we would expect today. No one discovers the bacteria, implements quarantine systems, or overhauls medicine. People simply continue living with the level of understanding they have. And that is precisely why this story will repeat itself time and again.